here sitting way over yonder, and I'm here, and Gil's going to open up on his own device. You probably just need to mute your device. Okay. But we will get started. We'll get started. So I'm thankful that you're back and have stuck it out. He's not an easy. Oh, I'm not muted, right? He's not an easy guy to learn. And 4 sessions, you totally can't cover Buber's extraordinary writing and profound writing and confusing writing in 4 sessions. We do him a disservice, right? To try to understand, right? Even this book, right? Like even like when I look at it, right? Just it's so small, and even this book, like if you're paging through it, you know that it takes a read and then a reread, and then sometimes a reread, right? T Sinai, capital T, capital S, 363. If you can't get in, let me know. So we're gonna tuck in. We're gonna look a little bit. Gail, if you can't get in, let me know. We're gonna look a little bit at what Buber has to say about Zionism and Israel and some of what he wrote, and then a little bit, kind of in closing, we'll talk about what some of his detractors thought of his work, and then do a bit of a conclusion. But really, what I'm hoping is that we'll have more time to discuss his work and for me to hear what you're thinking about it. So let me open this. Can you see? You can see the screen? Are you in? Okay.
So capital T, capital
Yeah, it's right. Is it capital T and capital S? Did you need capital T and capital S to get into the website? I think many of you are
lowercase.
All lowercase. Okay, all lowercase. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't capitalize.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about Israel and where Buber. Anybody need a recap from anything from the first few weeks where we've been learning? If you do, just unmute yourselves, please, because I can't hear you quite as easily when we're not sitting in the same class, and I for sure can't see every screen when I have the screen share up. Gil, are you in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but we're going to talk a little bit more about Buber. He was, you see, an ardent Zionist early in his childhood. But actually, let me stop this first. Let me just kind of give you a little bit of background. So you know, right? If we were to stitch together his picture, his history, you know how he grew up. You knew a little bit about his family life, and he. So you just got to mute, okay?
Yeah.
And his. Yeah, there we go. His drift away from philosophy, really, from traditional Judaism, started once he started his academic studies, right? I think we've already talked about that. But while he was living in Leipzig and studying there, he became involved in the Zionist movement, which was, somewhat unusual. And in 1899, he was a delegate to the Third Zionist Congress, where he delivered a really important address, emphasizing the importance of education as opposed to the propaganda in bringing Jews into the movement, right? He really fought against just all Jews need to be in the homeland, and he wanted it to be educational. And what he said was, we must win the whole people for our cause, and win them not merely by external agitation, but through inner transformation. They must not be Zionists as one is conservative or liberal, but as one is a man or an artist. This can be accomplished through inner agitation, through nourishing Jewish culture. The spirit of the people is national history, and it's national literature through education of the people. So he saw really our return to Israel as educational, not just that it was a fait accompli and that all Jews should live in the homeland, but really as a way to deepen both our education and our interaction, right? That comes as no surprise given who he was and what he was teaching. Somewhere around the early 1900s, 1901, 1902, he was appointed as the editor of Die Welt, the official weekly publication of the Zionist movement. And then after a year, he resigned over differences that he had with Herzl and his preference, Buber's preference for promoting cultural Zionism as opposed to political Zionism, right? So that's where he and Herzl parted company. And then shortly after that, he became, interested again in his scholarly pursuits and the religious message of the movement, and and wrestled with that as he continued to write. Just before the war, just as Germany was being taken over by the Nazis, he was dismissed from his position in the university in Frankfurt, and he made Aliyah. Right, so he moved to Israel. And after some bumps and some twists, because he wasn't well regarded by all, we've talked about this as well, he eventually became appointed as a professor at the Hebrew University, and he was most well known at Hebrew U for his teaching of philosophy and his philosophy in particular of dialogue. Right? If you had to give a title to Buber, it would be philosophy of dialogue. And he translated the Hebrew Bible into German. That was also what he did. Okay, so that's kind of how he transitioned from living in the Ukraine and in Germany to Israel right around the time of the war. Okay, so that's how he got there, and I will share the screens now so you can see. Okay. So you see, he also founded, I forgot to mention this, he founded the Central Office for Jewish Adult Education. This was in Germany. And this was at a time when education was being limited in Germany, and secular schools were cracking down on what could be taught, according to the state. And everything Jewish, cultural, social, educational was slowly being shut down. And so he was appointed, and he founded and appointed a staff in the Central Office for Jewish Adult Education, hoping to increase Jewish education as Nazi Germany was becoming more and more restrictive to Jews. And initially he had conflict and ambivalence about living in Israel and about the Jewish state, but he moved there. And he remained, which is interesting, we talked about this a while ago, in his move to Israel, uncharacteristic of for many of his generation, an advocate for a binational state, right, for an Arab and an Israeli state, far ahead of what many, we would call him very far left at this point, right, but he was far ahead of most of his peers in his principled desire to have a two-nation state, and that Palestinian refugees should have the right to live in Israel as well. And he taught much about the Balfour Declaration and who, which land belonged to whom and by what accords. And he advocated for, you see this is on the right-hand side of your screen, for egalitarianism within Israel for both the Jews and the Arabs, and that they ought to share the land, right? And that made him quite unpopular with political Zionists, made him quite unpopular with the religious Zionists, and he had to carve out his own niche as a cultural Zionist as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else from here. I think that's about it, right, from there. Any questions at all? I don't know if I have this on here.
I would like to know the difference between a political Zionist and a cultural Zionist.
Yeah, so, right, so it's a good question. So the religious Zionists, right, we can understand what that was, that they were entitled to the land according to the Bible, right? Political Zionists claim that according to the Balfour Declaration, according to any of the earlier documents, that politically that land had been divided and given legally and politically on the world stage to Israel, right, to Israel. Let's hold on to for a second what it means to be a cultural Zionist, and because that's what we're going to look at a little bit more deeply, what and how he understood Israel to be a place for Jews living in diaspora, and certainly from Eastern Europe, most especially. So there was an author who wrote about, his name is Samuel Brody, about Buber, that he was especially interested in the idea that he seemed correct about a lot of things, even though he was lost. His point of view was not adopted by the majority of Zionists or Israelis, but he predicted that if things didn't go his way, the conflict would continue and it would defeat the higher purposes of Zionism as he saw them. If the conflict were the main feature of life and the thing people were always thinking about, then the higher goals of Judaism wouldn't even be addressed, and Judaism itself would become a kind of victim of the conflict.
Wow.
So that is his first nod to
Wow.
a cultural Judaism, right? Right. Wow, because of its resonance today, right? Wow, because he was writing at the end of the 1930s, right? Against the backdrop of Nazi Germany, and positing something that was that not that it was groundbreaking, but it was certainly not the popular perception or position rather for Jews who were trying to firmly found a state of Israel, right? So Herb, that's the beginning of the answer about cultural Judaism, right? Now, if I were to stop the screen share and ask you, what is it that you think Buber thought could be realized by living in the land of Israel? What kinds of answers might you offer up? What do you think his push was for us to be living in Israel?
I think part of his push may have been to escape the Nazis and to have, a safe place for Jews to go, which is where he went to escape the Nazis, where we could be safe in a land that we weren't, that no one had prejudiced against us, that we could be equals.
Okay, so some of it just, right? Some of it was just on a quite a fundamental level, safety, right? Safety, right? A refuge, right? Right. What else?
Go ahead. The word whole comes up a lot in his thinking, and so that sense of being a whole people, a whole nation, a place to be together.
Right. Right.
Yeah, my thought is I thought I heard that he wanted the ethics and values of Judaism to be carried out here, and if that didn't happen, then that was wrong.
So, as a juxtaposition to what was going on in Germany, or as a nation on its own?
As a nation of its own is the feeling I had, that that would be vis-a-vis the Arabs.
Okay. Yep. Anybody else?
I'm wondering how you can apply like his, I, thou, I type idea with connection with Israel.
What do you think? Because it factors in. What do you think?
It offers more of an I, thou moment. I don't
How
know.
so? I tend to think you are correct, but how so?
Oh boy. Yeah, I didn't think that far ahead.
Right.
Okay, so I'll just go with my own personal experience. How about that? I've been fortunate enough to have been able to visit Israel. And for me, there is just something about it, just being there. Call it the ambience, call it what you will. I can't explain the feeling of connection. Can't explain it.
Buber says Buber, right? I can't understand. I can't. It's ineffable, right? Right. I can't tell you what it is, but it is, right? You'll pardon the unfortunate pun, but you couldn't have said it more perfectly, right? Right. That would be an I thou encounter, right? It just is. It just is. And for any of us who've had the opportunity to be in Israel, it's inexplicable, right? There is something. Yeah, Keith, please.
When I'm
Just speak a little bit
staying at
louder.
somebody else's house, I can't.
Keith, we don't hear you.
Sorry, I thought pressing the space bar would be enough.
Lift up your microphone. I think your microphone is on your headphone and we don't hear you clearly.
Okay, how about now?
A little bit better.
Okay, sorry. When I'm staying at somebody's house, I can't entirely be myself. But when I'm in my own house, then I can be me. And so maybe he thought that by having a own country, then Judaism could um, be itself and find its voice in the world stage.
Yeah, yeah, it's a powerful way to imagine it, right? Being in your own home, right? Was that a place that was understood to be his home, right? For him individually, right? For him, and then for us as a possibility, as a people possibility, right? Right. Anybody else at all? Okay, let me go on. So Brody goes on, this author goes on, he writes a good work, and then the next person we're going to look at is probably someone with whom you are familiar. Brody goes on to say that Buber would be profoundly disappointed in today's Israel, both because it is increasingly capitalistic and less socialistic than in its early days, and because Jewish ethno-nationalism seems ascendant. He thinks that Buber has been received into the American Jewish canon in a certain way, especially because of his thinking about dialogue and Hasidism. But there is this other aspect to Buber that we don't talk about as much, and that's this theopolitical, right, God-centered, right, that there is a, right, it comes from theism, right, that this idea that there is a theopolitical side, and his belief in binationalism in Israel-Palestine, and Brody thinks that should come back into the agenda. A contemporary writer, right, a contemporary writer. What do you think about Brody's take on Buber and his cultural Zionism? Yes, no, does it resonate?
Mhm. Yes.
Anybody else at all? Should we go on? A quiet bunch today. We've got to caffeinate you next time.
It doesn't resonate with me if
No?
I can be different. You know, I think Buber saw Jews as guests in other people's countries. You know, being a European Jew, maybe we could have said Galicia was ours, but it wasn't. You know, we were outsiders in Europe, and if we go to Palestine, the question is, can we be insiders, and can you be an insider without saying that you're creating a Jewish state? And that's where the problem he has. Okay, how do you create a Jewish state but have two different nationalities trying to control it? And that's been the problem since the beginning of the forming of Israel. So I don't understand how he could handle that. You know, want one thing, but think it could be achieved by creating a situation that could be compared to the way Jews lived in Europe.
So does it harken back to what Keith said about being in your own home?
Yes.
Being the crux of, Keith, if I understood you correctly, right? Kind of being as the crux of Buber's philosophy.
Yeah, to me, what Keith said is right. I mean, I've been to Israel twice, and every time you get off the plane, there's a feeling. And the feeling is that you're surrounded by people who are just like you, and you're home and you're safe. And, you know, and so what Keith said resonated with me. And that was the feeling I had. I wasn't different in Israel. I was accepted in Israel as a Jew, as an equal to everyone. And considering all of the problems that Israel had in its forming and the danger, et cetera, it's very hard to have that feeling unless you're surrounded by a community that you feel you're a part of.
Mhm.
And I don't understand how Buber could have felt that if he felt that we could have created a nation of two different nationalities.
Well, I think he was hoping that the Jews would enter into a I-thou relationship with the Palestinians and not treat them as objects.
Well, Keith, I don't know, at the time, I mean, obviously, we weren't in Israel when it was created, but I don't know if at the time anyone could have felt that way because of the hostility between the groups. Now, if you look at modern Israel, that might be a different story. I've known Palestinians, people of Palestinian descent, who are Israeli citizens who love Israel. And that has to be recognized, and their rights have to be recognized. But when Buber went, it was a very different story. There were still pogroms going on. There was still the fact that the Nazis were in Europe. There was still the fact that the leader of the Muslims in Palestine was residing within Germany at the time and calling for the killing of Jews. So I don't understand how he could have believed that could have been possible during while he lived. Maybe today, but not while he lived.
Do you think, it's completely speculative. Do you think that Buber would think that today things are better or worse than in his lifetime? Worse. So Gil says you can share on the screen too. You're here on the screen, right? You think worse, right? You unmute, I'll mute.
I would think he would see hope that there is an alliance between many Israelis of both Jewish and Palestinian descent, and that now the Palestinians have entered the government, and we'll get more people entered into the government and have a larger voice. So I would think that he thinks that he would think that maybe we're finally moving forward. But I don't know what would have been in his mind.
I don't think he would find that. I don't know why. Because I'm on. I would think Buber would find it a lot worse today than it was back in 1933. And in fact, the little I know of the history of what was going on we still got to call it Palestine because it wasn't Israel at the time. You had a better chance, because I wouldn't understand why, even if you created a Jewish state, why the government and the secular part of it wouldn't be the same for everybody. And at that time, if you allowed non-Jewish people to do whatever it is that they had to do for holidays and stuff and didn't interfere with anybody else, we'd be in a lot better position right now. Yeah, I can understand where Buber thought, this could really work.
No, Gilbert, at that time, there was a huge pogrom in Palestine. Thousands of Jews were slaughtered, okay? And he had to have known that happened.
Yeah.
Okay? So it wasn't a safe environment when he went to.
Well,
Wait, hold on.
Herbie, you talking about the Arab uprising of 36 to 38?
I believe so.
Yeah, well, the slaughtering went on both sides. The Arabs started it, the British finished it, but the Jews that were there were also committing, the sort of the same kind of reprisals that go on now. But Buber saw that, and if after 38, 39, he still thinks it was possible, he'd at least seen plenty of signs that it wasn't going to be easy.
well, yeah, it wasn't going to be easy, but at that time, again, all it would have taken is somebody like him or a few other people that had some pull to make this start to happen. I still think it would have been a lot easier then than it is now with the way that the two sides have, come apart the way it does. In fact, I would think Buber would come back and say he'd almost think it would be impossible to do that.
I would think that am I muted? No. That he was, I think this is correct to say, but tell me if I'm wrong. that the soul of Jews souls could flourish in the kind of Zionistic state that he envisioned. And that what he would see now is that it's pretty difficult for that. And that in fact, some would say we lost our souls because what he feared, that the conflict became the main feature
Right.
of life and the main attention that is given rather than any joy or fulfillment in being together or being in the land of
Right.
Israel.
Any of the possibilities for encounter and encounter through dialogue in his terms, right? Yeah.
Well, wait, let's go back to the time period.
Can
We
I
had
just say
we had
something?
the Nazis in Europe, okay? There was no dialogue allowed with them. They were trying to take over the Middle East and aligning themselves with many Arabs and especially the Palestinians and those who led in Palestine because they wanted to take it over and take it away from the British and make it part of the Nazi things. The head of the Palestinian movement, the religious head of the Palestinian movement, was a guest of Adolf Hitler for the entire war, and was directing anti-Semitic riots against Jews there. And so to say he went in there and thought, that everything could be kumbaya and everybody could get together would be a very silly thing on his part. And I'm sorry, not a realistic thing to do.
I don't think anybody thinks that he was a Pollyanna. I think he was a realist, right? I think he was a realist, but he was aspirational, right? In what the state could be, right? I think that was what his. I mean, as is the case with most of our philosophers, right? They had aspirations for how society could be, right? Not only a reflection of what was. Marie, go ahead.
So I'm just drawn to the first paragraph said that, so we're talking about today's Israel. So if we bring it to today, capitalistic, less socialistic, okay. And what caught my eye was Jewish ethno-nationalism seems ascendant. So I guess one question is, are we talking about a state that's largely Ashkenazi centered? And is it really open? I mean, we know that there are Ethiopian Jews, there's lots of Jews of color, there's Mizrahi Jews, there's Yemenite Jews, right? That historic, I don't know, seem to have been like at a sort of lower rung. I think Buber would be really disappointed in that because they're all Jews.
Right.
And to have this sort of hierarchy, I think he would not be happy with that.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I would agree.
And even the piece about being increasingly capitalistic. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the state was established and how exciting it was to learn about the kibbutzim. And there was idealism about how people could live together. And
yeah, and socialism now, we read it so differently.
Yeah.
Than right in its purer forms, right? How it was intended, so sociologically, right? But how it was understood as theory. And we can leave judgment and value aside for now, but right in its theory, right? Not in its practice, right? That was really the basis for the kibbutz movement, right? For the kibbutz movement. Yeah, I'm gonna go on just so hopefully I can go on. Yeah, okay. So the next person who we're going to look at is Paul Mendes-Flohr, who many of you, I would imagine, are familiar with his work, a wonderful scholar, predominantly at the Hebrew University for many, many years of modern Jewish history, and then at the University of Chicago Divinity School as well. He wrote extensively. He's another one who wrote extensively on Buber. His works are tremendous. And if you're going to read somebody's take on Buber, I would highly recommend Mendes-Flohr. He writes in a way that's much more accessible than Buber himself, and he gives and for those of you who are academics here, you might find his critical approach, his critical analysis accessible. So we're going to look a little bit at what he has to say. And in particular, he wrote this commentary, A Land of Two Peoples, Martin Buber on Jews and Arabs. Okay, so we're going to look just for a minute at that. So definitely Mendes, let me just move this, the influences of Buber. This is what Mendes Flores talks about, that he had he was influenced by where he lived and how he lived, the religion with which he was raised. His family construct really weighed heavily on who and how he was, right? The desertion by his mother impacted him, but his study of world religions, and I've mentioned, I know more than once, that he is much more popular in Christian philosophy circles than he is in Jewish, but here you'll see a little bit more, right? That he took a great deal from many other religions, and he was very much influenced by Buddhism, which many don't know, which he felt had a type of spirituality that lets us address the world in every situation. So it's got that kind of universal approach, which has there's a kind of a thin membrane for some between that sense of universalism and socialism and kibbutz life, and right, you can see where those two things would fall together. And he says the Buddhist streak in Buber's thought, this is Flores, focused on the difference between hearing and listening, believing that listening is actually a spiritual and existential act. Right, which we can understand when you think about Buber, right? That those dialogue encounters, those moments, whether they are with people or with animals, right? We read that one as well, right? The possibility that those offer, right? That he was a bridge builder between Christianity and Judaism. And here it's that last bullet, right? That many early Zionists, right, that like many early Zionists, he felt that Jesus was a part of the Jewish tradition, which was, when we get to the next section of why people in the Jewish world didn't like him, here's another point that you can, think about, right? That Jesus was a part of the Jewish tradition, that he was a Jew and part of Jewish spirituality. So this actually became an affront to many of our thinkers. Not a big surprise, right? And this is what Flores, does someone want to read this? This is Flores's quote. There's nothing tricky in this passage.
There's nothing foreign to Jews about Jesus's teaching, but it's the message of Christ which brings Jews outside of Jesus's teachings. Mendes Flores adds, Buber felt Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus of the early Gospels was deeply part of Judaism, but that it was Paul who brought the teachings of Jesus outside of Judaism.
I see nods. What are you thinking?
That's my
I heard a screenshot. You can't, no hiding here, friends. I heard that. I heard that, and I have teenagers at home, so I know that sound. So, what are you thinking? I'm seeing some nods and some ahas and some head scratching. What do you think?
I'm very comfortable with that.
Tell us more, Bob.
That's right.
Well, I do think I have thought probably for a long time that I have no problem with the teachings of Jesus. It's what was done with them where my problem arises.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you are not alone in that, right? But that it was, it's Flores who was positing that it was really Paul who took it to that next place, which made it objectionable to mainstream Jews, right, at the time, or right. Anybody else who's nodding and smiling and without words? Just a nod and a smile is sufficient too. That's sufficient. Tells us a lot. So here's a little bit more about the Buber's realism around this dialogue, right? So for Buber, right, binationalism was only a heuristic vision, right, from the Western world, I think is how we might explain that, to eliminate a possible political configuration that would allow Jews and Arabs to dwell in the same land in mutual trust and dignity, right? That was the tension that he addressed, right? So it kind of makes sense when we see where things have landed, right? And then I wonder if somebody would read this for us. This is a fascinating piece. This is, you'll see at the bottom, from the bottom, there's an open letter from Buber to Mahatma Gandhi, who, let me just, before we actually get to that point, the assassination of Gandhi and the establishment of the State of Israel were separated by only about a half a year, right? You might remember. And writing in 1938, Gandhi had not been sympathetic to the Jewish national home in Palestine, since he thought that Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense that England belongs to the English or France to the French. So why should the Jews, not like other peoples of the earth, make that country their home where they are born and earn their livelihood? He urged German Jews, this is Gandhi, to claim Germany as their home and to follow the example of civil resistance. The Jews of Germany, this is in quotes, the Jews of Germany can offer satyagraha under infinitely better auspices to the Indians of South Africa. The calculated violence of Hitler may even result in a general massacres of Jews, but to the God-fearing, death has no terror, wrote Gandhi in 1938. So this was, right, in response, this was an open letter from Buber to Gandhi. And I wonder if somebody can read that for us.
Our settlers do not come here, as do the colonists from the Occident, to have natives do their work for them. They themselves set their shoulders to the plow, and they spend their strength and their blood to make the land fulfill. But it is not only for ourselves that we desire its fertility. The Jewish farmers have begun to teach their brothers, the Arab farmers, to cultivate the land more intensively. We desire to teach them further. Together with them, we want to cultivate the land, to serve it, as the Hebrew has it. The more fertile the soil becomes, the more space there will be for us and for them. We have no desire to dispossess them. We want to live with them. We have no desire to dispossess them. We want to live with them. We do not want to dominate them. We want to serve with them.
What do you think? And I'm sorry, my mistake. Occident is, that's the West. That's what I meant. Not heuristic, which is in the earlier slide, which is, I mixed up my words. I had to look both of them up because I had forgotten, right? Heuristic is learning by experience. So this is right, we don't come as the colonists from the West, right? Right. So what do you understand as
Well,
yeah.
here he's claiming that
We-
the
just speak a little bit louder for us?
He's claiming that the Zionist project is not colonialism, which
Right.
Gandhi would be very sensitive to. And he's making a claim here that the Zionist pioneers are going to be different than we were, the Europeans were in America, and the Spanish were in America, and all that kind of thing. However, I think, events proved him wrong. It really turns out to be very much like colonialism.
Right. So it's right. So Buber offering an assurance, right, by way of this open letter, and also his hopes. Right. We go back to what he imagined that land to be, right? Not what it ultimately was or is, but what he aspired for it to be, right? Right. And in all of his teachings, right?
I wonder,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder at that time whether there was evidence of this tone and this attitude. Maybe it coexisted with also the sense of, okay, we're here, it's ours, we're going to build it up, and and some of what has continued to be disrespectful. I don't know, but to me, and I've been doing lots of thinking because so many of our lefty friends talk about colonizing, about what colonizing means, and to me, it totally disregards the thousands of years of this being a sense of being a homeland that we aspired to, not a place where we were just all of a sudden deciding, well, we should go there. So I feel that, that the parallels with colonizing the Americas really don't hold up in that way.
Yeah.
But certainly the oppressive behaviors that have arisen and do have their parallels.
Yeah, thank you.
This was a very different time. This is 1939. And before the Second World War, Jews came to not as colonizers. They didn't represent another country. They came to settle there. Okay. And it's not like they took property away from anybody who was there. They bought property. Okay. And most of the property they bought wasn't from residents who were sitting there, who were mostly tenants, but from people who lived, in Cairo and in Syria, who were big landlords, who owned vast parts of the land, who were selling them land that they didn't think had a great value and eventually became valuable by the sweat of the people who came. But then the Second World War came, and you had millions of people who needed a place to go, and you had 1 million Jews who were thrown out of Arab countries who needed a place to go. And that changed the entire environment, with all of these people coming. So there was a very different environment after the war than there was before the war. And many people who came there had no choice but to come there. Where were the 1 million people in Arab countries who were dispossessed going to go? Nobody was going to take them in. Where were the Jews who were dispossessed in Europe going to go? No one was going to take them in. So yeah, maybe it became a burden on the Palestinians, but these people had no place to go. It's not like they wanted to colonize the country and take it over and take it away from somebody else. They were just trying to survive.
Right. And this is, Gil, I'm going to let you on, right? And this is in part the end of what you said, Herb, and certainly Joyce, what you just articulated, what Martin Buber was actually saying to Mahatma Gandhi, right? That was precisely it. Yeah, Gil, go ahead.
I was going to say, based on the way Herb is talking about this, I guess the ends justified the means.
Wait, you're muted. You're still muted, but that was brilliant. Go ahead. Hold on.
I guess, sir, what I hear, I'm still muted. At least it looks muted.
Yeah, you are still muted. You got to unmute.
No, he's not.
I was
No,
going to
he's not.
say,
We let him.
Herb, from the way you explain it, I'm hearing that the ends justified the means. Because in the end,
Can you
we
hear?
got-
Wait, can you hear?
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because in the
Yeah.
end, no matter how you want to play it, with the Balfour Declaration, we ended up taking their land. There's no way you can explain it. It was a land grab by Jews to create the state of Israel. And if I'm a sitting Palestinian at the time, I don't think I would have been very happy with that.
Wait a second.
I wouldn't have been very happy with Jews coming to Palestine while
That-
there was
that
no
is-
country for
Gilbert,
them.
With all due
So-
respect, that's nonsense.
Excuse me?
With all due respect, that's nonsense. I mean, you're talking as if the Palestinians lived there for thousands of years before we came, and they did not. That was mostly vacant land up until 100 years before.
Whoa,
let me
Herb,
finish.
take a breath.
Let me finish.
Woo.
So Herb, you believe that since the
Lord.
Bible said it was our land, no matter what happened between them and now, it was always our land.
No, I don't base anything on the Bible. I base it on the fact that there is no nationality as Palestinian. Okay, this was vacant land for a long time. May I finish? These are Arabs who moved there. Most of the land was not owned by people who occupied Palestine, but landlords in Syria, in Egypt, in Jordan, and
So
other.
Okay, so wait, hold on.
And
I'm
there
gonna,
was
wait, hold on. Can you hear me or no? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
So I'm just gonna say, we are not, if you would just be for a second, we are not gonna solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now. My goal, though, is to just offer you some of what Buber was writing about and thinking about vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine and coexistence, right? In an altogether different way than so many of our most prominent thinkers. So that was, I bring it for that. We could have an altogether different course facilitated by somebody else on the conflict, but an abundantly, right, kidding aside, an abundantly worthwhile conversation for us to have. I'm gonna go on just because I see the time. Gil, are you muted? Yeah, okay. So here is another piece that I want to get to, and we'll come back hopefully to your other thoughts as well, and your concerns and your questions. So Buber was influenced by the idea that the Hebrew word for faith is trust, and I love that. I think it speaks such power, little p, to his theory, right? His theory. And there's another overlay to the word faith and emunah, which is craft, that it is a craft, right? And it is something that is that evolves over time. So I thought that was also, being he was also a Hebraist, right? Another beautiful teaching from him that I wanted to share with you.
Did you say, so craft is a third?
There's another, yes, kind of etymology that's tied together with the word craft and faith and trust.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I wonder if somebody could read this for us. We're kind of just coming up to our conclusion, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the heart of Buber's theology. Does someone want to read that?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
At the heart of Buber's theology was his theory of dialogue, the idea that what matters is not understanding God in abstract intellectual terms, but rather entering into a relationship with him. Such a relationship, he believed, is possible only when we establish genuine relationships with one another. Whoever goes forth to his, with his whole being and carries it to all the being of the world finds him whom one cannot seek. Ooh, he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Easier to read than to understand, right? And not even easy to read. Yeah, I got that. Right. So this theory of dialogue, right, is his. Let me make sure that we got all that. Hold on. Right. This idea that dialogue and encounter was the ideal, right? And yet, right, he also taught that in daily life we tend to fail to live up to this ideal. And he wasn't offering it as a criticism, right? He was stating it as a fact without judgment, right? That we tend to treat the people in the world around us, as we talked earlier on, in that I-it experience, right? That for the things that are of use to us. And without this mindset, that there would be no science, no economics or politics, but that the more that we engage in this kind of thinking, the farther we drift from the I, thou experience that he speaks of, and that the capacity that we have to achieve these I, thou moments is a genuine encounter, right? When it doesn't emerge from what can I get from you, what can you do for me, but what do we experience in being together, whether that means in the observance of the commandments or the study of our sacred texts or prayer or living in the land of Israel, right? Any of the things that he spoke about, right? That any of those places are only as good, and this was where his detractors had problems, right? Only as good as those things that I just listed give you the opportunity to be in an I, thou moment. Okay. So tell me what you are thinking, what you're coming away wondering about from Buber that I in all likelihood won't be able to answer, but what you're wondering about. Or what resonated for you? Did anything resonate for you? I don't mean tonight. I mean, in just dipping a toe into Buber waters.
Well, for me, this has a lot in common with what we're trying to achieve in psychotherapy. I mean, not all the time, obviously. You gotta, set up your appointment and write your check, and there's a lot of therapies that don't really care about genuine encounter, like cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't care about that so much. but most of the others, that's really what the target is. And especially in, say, marriage counseling, where the therapist is trying to get the couple to set aside their grievances to have a real I thou encounter. Although we don't call it that so much. In individual therapy, it's called coming to the session without memory or desire.
That memory or desire.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
And did you want to speak, Gil? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got on, just unmute. You unmute, I'll mute.
Um, I think Buber would be more interested in the process than the actual outcome. I think he gives us a goal to reach with the understanding that you may never reach it, but it's the process of trying that's important.
But don't try.
Joyce, Joyce, tell us what your was.
Everybody said, but don't try.
Pardon me?
Didn't he say but don't try?
Did you say don't try? No, he didn't say that. Yeah, no, he didn't say that.
No? Okay. I thought he said in the effort to make it happen, you lose it.
Oh, Buber, you mean?
Yeah,
Buber.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't craft an I thou moment.
Yeah.
Right. You can't work towards it. You can't be like everything else in Judaism, right? You can't be disciplined into right. Not everything else, but right in terms of the rigors of Judaism, you can't train to have I thou moments, right? You can be open to them. You can be right. You can increase. You can cultivate the spaces in which you might have those encounters, right?
Isn't that sort of working towards that?
Right. What do you think? Is it? Did you hear what Gil said? Yeah, he said, isn't that kind of working towards that? Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe. Yeah.
Would you consider him a particularly Jewish philosopher? I mean, I can see he's a philosopher, but I can
Yeah.
see his appeal to outside of Judaism.
Yeah.
And I can see those who would not be very fond of him within Judaism
Yeah.
for some of his philosophies.
Yeah. What other than like the kind of the bullet points, well, we're almost at that time, but almost, aside from the bullet points that I laid out about his detractors, what makes you think that he might not have been popular? Why do you think people didn't care for him in the Jewish world?
Well, I don't think he had a very popular belief of Zionism. I think he was more of a humanitarian or humanist than he was a Zionist in many respects. I think the detractors may have felt that he was straying from orthodoxy or Jewish thought.
Why was that dangerous?
That's very dangerous.
Why was it dangerous?
Because it means that other Jews who follow him will also stray from the thought and start thinking for themselves.
And why do let me it begs the question, right? Why do Reformed Jews dig him?
Because we stray from Orthodox.
Right? Because that's not the only way to do it, right? It's not a yardstick like that, right? Where potential exists because you are shomer mitzvot, right? Because you're Torah observant, right?
I was thinking,
Keith and then Joyce.
So I was after our class last week, I was wondering if there was really any difference between what Buber was saying about religiosity and the position that most spiritual but not religious people take. It seems like they're saying about the same thing that Buber says. They're not following a organized religion, but they're going with with how the Spirit moves them.
Okay.
And of course, this is very threatening to institutions
Right.
who,
Bingo.
yeah.
Bingo, right? That was the answer, right? And in my little Zoom world, you're sitting right next to her, right? That's the threat, right? That's the threat, right? Right. That's a direct hit for organized Judaism, right? It's like voting yourself out of office, right?
I
Right,
want
Joe?
to say that, yeah, that in some ways, a lot of it his philosophy has come to be embraced. And I can remember coming back from Jewish Renewal, which is very, very much aligned with that. And that people in the Reform movement were threatened by that. And initially it was. And now much of the Jewish Renewal movement has actually been adopted by Reform Judaism. So it's an interesting evolution.
Right. And I think we talked, we'll stop in just a minute. I think we talked, right, that there is a traditional Jewish teaching that each successive generation away from Sinai is less. And it's a very pejorative teaching, right? That we will never be as pious. We will never be as devout. We will never be as upright in our Judaism, as Torah-centered as the people who were closest to Sinai. Not geographically, but who in time were closest to Sinai. That each successive generation away, that we are less and less, and people point to any number of factors that water down Judaism, and Buber is counted among them. Buber is counted among them. I do not fall in that camp. I don't know where you fall, but I am delighted to see that some of his works have made its way into our prayer book. I think some of his teachings are beautiful and powerful, and kind of like we've talked before, like poetry or music or art, right? To be experienced, not to be dissected. Right? Not like we've just done for the last 4 weeks. But that being said, right? But that being said, we took a kind of a view from on high, and we didn't actually study a lot of his writings, but we talked about him and his theories. But I would definitely encourage you in Chevruta, Bob. I love that you're going to be learning with your friend Peter. I would encourage you to read with a partner, to read in a small group, and experience his writings in little bits and pieces. There's so much more that I and Thou is the quintessential one, but so much more that he wrote that is worth our consideration. But thank you. It's been good to learn together, and thank you for coming in. Those who came in at different times during the weeks that we were together, and to be continued with whatever comes next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Thank you,
much.
Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Stay healthy, everybody, and I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.